Business is more than grinding to get it done. It's people, process, and payroll done right. It's protecting your team, leveraging every penny out of every dollar to build and grow. From HR to insurance, from strategy to scale. We give you the playbook so you don't have to figure it out the hard way. This is the PEO Playbook, hosted by Chad Philly with Staff Brokers Inc. Get valuable insights and learn to grow your team without HR headaches. Let's get started.
All right, welcome back to the PEO Playbook podcast. I am Chad Philly with Staff Brokers. We're going to get into it today on a little conversation about employee versus 1099. What is the difference? First, something that I commonly hear is, well, I have this 1099 employee. Let's start off with, there's no such thing as a 1099 employee. They're either an employee and you control a lot of what they do and how they do it and how they get paid, or you simply ask them to complete a task for you and they get paid a flat rate to complete the task. There is no such thing as 1099 employee. You can ask them to do it, kind of the simplest way. You can ask them to do it and have them do it and then make sure it's done correctly, and they're a 1099. You're going to ask them how to do it, ask them to do it for you, and then you're going to tell them how to do it. They're not a 1099. They're an employee. So let's start off real quick. The major factor that goes into this is the amount of control that the business owner has or business has over the person that is doing the work performed. Obviously, some big ones off the top of the list is, if you're controlling how the work is done step by step, it needs to be done like this. This is how you do it. This is, you're showing them how to do it, following it. You're controlling it, controlling the time frame within which they do it. It's not just if it's a, hey, you need to be here at this time and are dictating the time frames throughout the length of whatever that project is. They are more an employee than they are a subcontractor or a 1099. A 1099 would be somebody that, let's just say, hey, you're building a house, you're the general contractor. You say, hey, the house is, you're going to subcontract somebody to do the electrical work because you don't have your own electrical license. You call them up, say, hey, house is ready, go. You've given them blueprints and plans, but other than that, they're coming in, they're doing the work, you're paying them a flat price, they're supplying their own people and employees to do the work, they're supplying the cost, they're covering the cost of their own materials and everything that's going into it. There's no direction over how you want them to do it, starting here, start at this point, finish here, that kind of stuff. It is really up to them. Here's the job, here's the blueprints. Go ahead and finish it. So, how they do it, how you control them, but, from a behavioral point of view is a huge impact. If you're dictating the day-to-day stuff, they're an employee more than a subcontractor. And then obviously you have different employer responsibilities that you need to do if they are actually an employee versus a 1099. The other way is, like I said, is financial. Who's paying for the cost of materials? Is there, does the person that's doing the work, do they have a stake in the profit of the job? Are you assigning them, if they're being paid by the hour, 100% of the time they're going to be considered an employee. They're not going to be a subcontractor. So there's a lot of misconception in that, you're paying somebody a flat rate to do the job and they should be bringing their own tools, materials, and everything else to perform the work if they're a 1099 or a subcontractor. They're an employee and you've got to supply them tools, equipment, all the materials to get stuff done. They're really just hired labor. You're supplying everything else. You have a stake in the profit of the total completion of the job. They don't. That makes them a W-2 and an employee that an employer should be paying taxes and having insurance on. Also, relationship. If a business owner has a consistent ongoing relationship with somebody, and it's not just show up to here, do this, on an as-needed type of basis, a lot of times that leans more towards a employee-employer relationship versus a 1099 subcontractor. This is in general for business owners. If they're a 1099, they should be receiving 1099 income from more than just one particular business. If 100% of their business is coming from one place, It's a lot harder explanation to prove that they're a 1099 versus actually an employee. Not to say that it's not possible. It's out there that some people have, contractors that may do all of their electrical. You have a general contractor and they've got one electrician that does all their electrical work. Ideally, that electrician is doing work for other people too, versus just for that one specific person all year long. So those are the control stuff. Big thing is the job duties too. How is the work being done? If it's being micromanaged, do it this way, do it that way. They're a W-2 employee. They're not a 1099, and that's something that business owners have to consider. Like I said, it's an agreement. And it's agreement where the person doing the work can agree that they're a 1099. They want to be a 1099. They don't want you taking taxes out of what it is that you're paying them to do the work. All that is fine and dandy until somebody is injured or upset, and then somebody needs to find money. And then the legal process begins, and the attorneys sort out who's actually a 1099 versus who's a W-2. And then you have IRS tax implications, potential workers' comp implications, and so on and so forth. The other thing is cost. What are the associated costs with it? Employees typically show up, perform labor. They have no they have no material cost, equipment cost. All that is supplied by the employer. If you're paying somebody as a 1099, typically they should have their own tools. They should be bringing their own materials. They should have their own wiring. If they're an electrician, they should have their own piping and plumbing materials if they're a plumber. If not, you're flirting with a fine line of whether or not they're actually an employee or not versus a 1099. Obviously, and that's the big determining factor, because on average, if they're a 1099, it costs about 25% to 30% less because the employer no longer has to pay taxes. They're subcontracted. They do their own thing. They bring everything. The employer is no longer responsible for Social Security, Medicare, and all the other employer-related taxes that are associated with if that person were an employee. If there are any employee benefits being received by the person performing the work, there's a 99% chance that they should be an employee and should not be a 1099 in any form or fashion. And the other huge one that people don't necessarily think about is the cultural impact of a 1099 versus a W-2. Somebody that's a W-2 employee, typically they've gone through company trainings. They're familiar with company policies, procedures, how to interact with everybody, versus a 1099 that just comes in. They're not familiar with the rest of the people that may be on the team, don't know exactly how the culture of the company works, common courtesies. They come in, they do their job, they leave, and they don't have a real direct relationship with anybody else that is there. So this is a big thing. A lot of employers push it off as long as they can, especially startups and new businesses. Say, oh, well, they're a 1099. I said, everybody can agree to that, and that is completely fine. If somebody gets hurt in the line of work, that is when it's really going to get ugly and come out to determine, the attorneys are going to figure it out in court. Who's responsible for this person's injury? Are they being, how were they paid? Did they have control? Types of injury. The court system very much favors injured employees versus employers. So it's a lot easier for a 1099 to prove that they were actually an employee after the fact than the inverse of an employer defending themselves in that scenario. Also, just, in general, if you are paying somebody as a 1099, you want to pay it to a company. You do not want to pay that typically to a Social Security number. That is an extra layer of insulation for you as a business owner. By no means in a court of law will that save you. They're going to go through the litmus test, which you can find on the irs.gov website, that, all the determining control factors to find out specifically, are they a 1099? Do they qualify as a 1099? And whether or not, if it hits the fan, so to speak, would you, as the person that contracted them, be responsible for, undue harm that came to them? So it's a very, I would say, a heavily violated area because like I said, it saves employers about 30%. They don't have employer-related taxes. If they've got benefits that they offer their employees, they don't have to offer benefits to this subcontractor. A lot of potential savings in doing it that way. but there are some tests that need to make sure that they're completely in line and in working order, because after the fact is when it becomes problematic as to whether or not they are an employee or not an employee. Some things to definitely consider. The more control you have, the more likely that they are an employee, but you have better control of the final product as you get to determine exactly how everything's done, control how it's done. Obviously, some extra costs with that versus just subcontracting it and making them a 1099, in which case for them to be a true 1099, you contract them for a job and says, hey, this is the job and it needs to be done between this time and this time. And it doesn't matter what type of job it is. Like I said, it could be construction, it could be real estate photography, it could be wedding photography. You're just hired to show up, do a job. Nobody's dictating how you do the job. If you do the job, get the job done. Whoever contracts you checks on it to make sure that everything is done to the standard and the liking that they wanted. And that really is the end of that relationship. Well, that's it on this day's episode of 1099 versus W-2 employee. Again, there is no such thing as a 1099 employee, so please keep that in mind. Forward to talking to everybody again on the next podcast. Again, this is Chad Philly with Staff Brokers for the PEOplaybook.com podcast. See you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the PEO Playbook, where we help business owners unlock the power of PEOs and take their team to the next level. This episode was proudly brought to you by Legacy Sales Engineering. If you're ready to simplify HR, scale your business, and put the right team behind you, visit staffbroker.net to get started with Staff Brokers today.